Hello everyone, welcome to Study Buzz. This is Nikita and I'm thrilled to share this new video with you to make your verbal section much easier. But before we delve into today's content, make sure to hit that subscribe button and follow us on our Instagram channel and press bell icon to receive important videos updates. You can also follow us on our Instagram channel, which is studybuzz_education, and the other handles as is mentioned on your screen. You can also download our app, which is also given on the screen. Now let's move on to the video. So today's topic is welcome to CR, as in we are going to start with CR. We are going to delve into the critical reasoning portion of the verbal ability section. Now, before we start any new topic, we must understand what exactly is that topic about, what does that topic entail, and why should we pay attention to it? How is it going to help us with our preparations? When we understand the importance of that topic, then only we will be able to do justice to that topic and prioritize it accordingly. Now, any MBA entrance examination, no matter which one you go for, CAT, XAT, IIFT, which is now discontinued, or MAT, or whichever examination, be it even ZMAT, each and every examination, it contains a verbal section, right? A verbal section. It also contains other sections, one of which is LRDI, right? Logical reasoning. So that section also depends upon the basic application of logic. How do you logically solve questions? Before you solve questions, how do you understand what exactly is the question talking about, right? You need to comprehend. So basically what I mean to say is a sound logic is required for each and every section of the examination so that you can critically understand and analyze what the question is saying and answer accordingly, apply that accordingly, right? How do you get that? How do you reach that point? You need to have a sound understanding of the logic and how is logic used, what exactly is logic, to be able to reach that point, so that you do not make mistake in the question itself and you do not end up losing your marks because of that. However, apart from that basic application, CR, that is critical reasoning, sometimes also called verbal logic, is a very important part of the examination itself. As in, apart from its function of making a base for your comprehension and helping you understand things logically, you do get questions from verbal logic, from critical reasoning itself as well in the examinations. Now, what kind of questions am I talking about? I'm talking about the questions which are like assumption based questions, right? They will ask you what exactly is the assumption that the author is making in this particular question, then give you options and you have to choose from there. There are also argument based questions, there are inference based question, or question can ask you what exactly is the inference that you can make out from this information which is given to you from inference based questions are also extremely common in the RC section of the exam. There are also syllogs based question, as in syllogism based questions, right? So these are just some of the examples that I can come up from the right of my head. However, there are multiple more types which you can have in the examinations, like the example based questions and such. So this particular topic is extremely important when we talk about the examination, and this can also be seen from this analysis of past several year question papers of various examinations. Here you can see that assumption based questions, usually three questions are there in the CAT examination, similarly in XAT as well, and MAT also has them. CMAT, IFT, which is now cancelled from this year, used to have them as well, SNAP as well, right? So similarly, inference based, strengthening, weakening, as in which option strengthens the contention which is provided or which one weakens it, those kind of questions as well. Then the conclusion based question, as in what conclusion you can reach. Flaw or weakness, as in what is the flaw there, you will have to choose the option. From the options you will have to choose which flaw exists in the given argument, right? Those kind of questions. Paradox based questions, which are comparatively rare when compared to other types of questions, however they are still asked a lot. principle based questions as well as parallel reasoning based questions. These are some of the common examples of CR questions or critical reasoning questions which are found in the major examinations, major MBA prep examinations. Now, moving on to what exactly is CR or what do we mean by CR, let's dive into it. So, when we talk about critical reasoning directly refers to the process of evaluating arguments and identifying assumptions and then drawing conclusions based on it. Right? For example, this just generally means that in critical reasoning you use the information which is already provided to you, and then using that information you apply the logic, straying away from the opinions, from preconceived notions and such things, so that you can reach the conclusion which is required of you. This is what we generally mean in the layman terms from critical reasoning, right? Now, critical reasoning, as we've talked about, basically works by applying logic. You need to apply logic for critical reasoning. So, generally, there exist various kinds of formal logic that can be applied for any kind of questions, for any kind of situations. Just to make it easy for us to understand, let's talk about the three most common, mostly used formal logics. First one can be called deductive logic. In deductive logic, the premise which are given to you intend to provide complete support for the conclusion. Which means if the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. It is a necessity. For example, if I say all mammals have a backbone, right? And then next sentence I say a whale is a mammal. Then based on these two, can I reach the conclusion that a whale has a backbone? I can do that, right? This is a valid conclusion that can be reached based on these two premises which is given to me. This is what we mean by deductive logic. In deductive logic, the premise provides complete support to the conclusion and there is no ambiguity. The conclusion which is reached in deductive logic is 100% true. The most common application or the most common type of questions that you can find of deductive logic are silogs, right? We will talk about them in further classes. Moving on, inductive logic is the next one that we can have. In inductive logic, the premise provides some degree of support, right? It does not provide 100% support as was in the deductive logic. It provides some kind of support to some degree, right? But not complete assurance for the conclusion. So, for example, if I say most birds can fly, and then I say a robin is a bird, then I would say there is a chance of robin can probably fly. So I'm not very sure, but there is a very high chance that robin can fly, right? This is what we mean by inductive logic. See, if I compare both of them in deductive logic, what happens is I have made observations of all the mammals. I know about all the mammals. Each and every mammal have a backbone, right? Based on that, I can come to a sure conclusion that if something is a mammal, then it will have a backbone. However, what happens in inductive logic is I have limited amount of observations. I do not know about all of them, but most of them. So most of the birds can fly, and if something is a bird, then there is a very high chance of it flying, right? This is the main difference here. In the deductive logic, there is an assurance for the conclusion. It is going to be 100% true if the premises are true. In inductive logic, there is a very high chance of it happening, but there are also some exceptions allowed, right? Now, when we compare them to abductive logic, abductive logic is the one which is mostly used for medical examinations or research or such kind of thing. It is not used usually for our kind of applications, as in for the examinations and such kind of applications. This generally refers to best possible explanation. We do not know about things here, but we are trying our best to reach a conclusion. We are trying our best to reach an explanation here. For example, if the ground is wet, if this is a premise which is given to you that the ground is wet, then I can reach a conclusion. There is a very high chance that I can say it rained last night, right? Which is why the ground is wet. However, rain is not the only reason why the ground could be wet. It could be that someone is, throwing water there, so that could also be the reason. However, I am not sure about it. Or for example, say when you go to the doctors and you say I have these symptoms, I have a sore throat, I have a sore running nose, those kind of things, and the viral flu is going on at that moment. The first conclusion or the first explanation that the doctor might think is that you also have contracted the flu, right? So they are not sure yet. They will be running tests and those kind of things, but they are reaching for the best possible explanation there, right? This is what we mean by abductive logic. So as you can see, in deductive logic there was 100% chances of conclusion being true. In this one it was slightly lower. In this one, in the inductive one, it was slightly lower. In the abductive one, it went even further low, right? So basically the difference here is the amount of observations that we have. In deductive logic, we have a lot of observations. We observed each and every mammal. In inductive, it went slightly lower, most of them. In abductive, we know the correlations, or we know certain things which are related to it, and based on them we are trying to reach the best possible outcome that could be, right? So we are just reaching here. This is what we mean by the basic applications of logic. Now that we are done with the basics of formal logic, or what kind of formal logics exist, let's talk about the 4 pillars of critical reasoning. What do we mean by 4 pillar? Essentially, it just simply means that these are the 4 concepts without which verbal logic or critical reasoning cannot exist, right? So let's talk about it. So first one is premise. Premise literally refers to a statement or proposition which is already given to you, or we can also say that this is the statement which forms the basis of the logical argument, right? So essentially, premise literally just means basic information which is already provided to you in the question. You do not have to think about it. It is always going to be true. This is the information which is given to you. Without a question, there cannot be an answer, right? So similarly, without a premise, there cannot be any reasoning. There cannot be anything that you can apply the reasoning to. Premise is the base, the question itself which is already given to you, the information which is given in the question on which you apply the logic and then reach the conclusion. That information is what we mean by premise, right? So for example, if you say let's talk about an example of deductive logic. Okay, that's the easiest one. So if this is the question which is given to you, it says all humans are mortal. The next one says Socrates is a human and then I ask you to reach a conclusion based on these two statements. You can easily say that Socrates is a mortal, right? However, if I do not give you this sentence and simply give you Socrates is a human and then ask you to reach a conclusion based on that, would you be able to do it? No, you won't, right? Because the premise is incomplete. What do we mean by this? Socrates is a human. Okay, he's a human. So what? What next? We have no idea what to do, right? So, the information, the basic information of the question itself was incomplete, which is why you cannot apply logic there, right? This is what we mean by premise. Premise is the basic information which is already given to you in the question. Okay. Now, moving on to the next one, which is assumption. Assumption literally refers to an unstated or implicit premise. Here in the premise part, it was the statement which was already given to you. But sometimes there are things like, we sometimes say that here the things in between the words or in between the lines, thinking in between the lines. So those kind of things. So assumption is similar to that. Assumption are the implicit or implied or unstated premise which are there in the question. Without them also we cannot solve the question. Without premise we cannot solve the question. Without assumption also we cannot solve any question. Assumption is also a type of premise, but it is not written there. It is implied. Implied as in without writing it is shown that yes, it is there. Let's have an example just to understand it better, right? It is the unspoken kind of premise. So if I say this, the lights in house are on, she must be in. The lights in the house are on, so she must be in, right? Just because lights are on, I'm concluding that she must be inside the house, right? Why am I doing that? How can I reach this conclusion just based on this one? Because the only reason is I can only reach this conclusion based on this single statement when there is an assumption, when I already know from previous knowledge that the lights are only turned on when she is inside the house. If that is not the case, then this is impossible to reach. This conclusion becomes impossible, right? So assumption is what? That lights are only on when she is inside the house. This is what we mean by assumption. Assumption was also necessary for reaching this conclusion. Without that assumption, this does not make sense, right? There are a lot of questions as to why we can say this or how can we reach this conclusion. So that assumption becomes the explanation or the connecting bridge between these two, right? This is what we mean. Assumption is the implicit premise, the implied unspoken premise. Moving on. Inference. Inference is actually extremely important because there are many questions which will ask you to reach an inference, or and not only in just the direct inference based question kind. However, in the RC as well, inference takes an important place. So inference, what do we mean by that? Inference is the logical process of reaching a conclusion. What do we mean by that? We mean that when there are premise given to you, when we can make out the assumptions and then based on them we apply the logic, so we reach certain examples, we reach certain conclusions, we reach certain results based on that, right? We get certain answers based on that logic application on those premise, using the assumptions and those things. So what are those observations that we make? Those are the inferences. Why am I calling it a logical process? Because there are going to be multiple observations that you can make from one single set of premise, one single argument, right? That does not mean that is the end result we are looking for, right? Hence, it is a logical process. Let's have an example. So if I say this, let's change the pen so we do not get confused. So if I say this, he might not get into the team this year because the team needs physically fit players. Now, if I consider the statement that he might not get into the team this year because the team needs physically fit players, right? So based on this, what observations can I make? I can say that he wanted to be considered for the team. He was interested in being in the team, right? He is not going to get in. So based on that I can consider, or based on that I can observe that he is not physically fit, right? So there are multiple observations I can come across from this one. There is a team being made. He was being considered for that team, right? So there are these kind of observations that I can make based on the single argument which is provided to me, this single portion of the thing which is provided to me. So these are the inferences, these observations are the inferences that I reach during the logical application process, right? When I'm looking for the conclusion, so before I actually determine the conclusion, I am going to make certain observations and then choose the best possible conclusion that I need from those observations, right? So those observations are the inferences that I make based on the argument, based on the premise, the assumption, and the logic that I apply. Okay. Now to the last one, conclusion. Conclusion is essentially the end result that I wanted. From these inferences, I will choose the best possible end result which is required according to the question, and then that will be our conclusion. This is the entire thing. This is the only thing that we mean. So sometimes it also happens that inference and conclusion as a word are basically used interchangeably, right? However, there exists a very subtle difference between them. Inference is one step before reaching the actual conclusion, right? However, a lot of times it does happen that the main conclusion ends up being one of the observations, which is also why sometimes people use them interchangeably. Okay, so this was all about the basic concepts of CR. Let's move on. So when we apply logic in critical reasoning, the application of logic is not always going to be correct. It is not always going to be sound, right? The conclusion, the answer that you get for the questions is not always correct. There are some problems, there are some flaws that we might reach, or there are some flaws that we might run into, which results in our conclusion being wrong, which results in our answer being wrong, right? So let's talk about those common flaws or fallacies that we might commit when applying logic so that we can avoid them in future, right? So these are the some common fallacies. First one is correlation causation. Occurs when we assume that because two variables or two events are correlated to each other because of some reason, one must be the cause of another, right? Let's have an example for better understanding. Let's just assume that it is summer. The summers are going on, right? In summers, what happens? One, the ice cream sales goes up, and also because of the heat we like to go into the water, right? So a lot of people like swimming. So because of that sometimes, a lot of times actually, the drowning incidents also goes up, right? So because these two things are correlated, these two things are related to each other by this variable of summer, can we say that because ice creams ice cream sale went up, so the drowning incidence also went up? Does that make sense? That does not make sense, right? This is what we mean by correlation causation. When we mistakenly assume that because two variables are correlated to each other because of anything, right? Because of a common variable, so one is the cause of another. This is what we mean by correlation causation fallacy. Moving on, composition fallacy. Composition fallacy literally refers to an error when we assume that what is true for a part of it will also be true for the whole of it, right? For example, if I say that these bricks are light bricks, so what do we mean by that? They are light compared to the other kind of bricks, right? So if I say that this building is constructed using light bricks, so the building is also light. Does that make sense? In this example, the total weight of the building is obviously going to be larger. It cannot just be determined to be a light building because the comparatively lightweight bricks were used for it. When we join them together, there are obviously going to be a lot of weight there, right? So we cannot say that the building itself is light just because the composite bricks were of lightweight comparatively. That does not make sense, right? So this is what we mean by composition fallacy, when we mistakenly assume that just because we know a little about something, or one portion or one event about something, we know everything about that, and then make conclusion based on that, right? This is what we mean here. Now, or it is like saying, the composition fallacy is like saying, because we have 5 millionaires in the country, so entire country is of millionaires. Does that make sense? Obviously not, right? Now moving on to the next one, called red herring. Red herring refers to when we are talking about one particular argument and then we get distracted and introduce, or someone, for the purpose of distracting the logic, introduces something irrelevant, right? For example, if assume in the parliament there is a session going on. Session is for what? Session is for environmental policy, right? They are trying to make a decision on environmental policy, and someone stands up and says, why are we talking about environmental policy when our education system is in ruins? Is the education system anyway relevant to environment policy? Not directly, right? There might be some very high links or something, right? However, in this case, education system and environment policy are not linked together. So using the argument that education system is in ruins, and because of that we should not talk about environment policy now, that does not make any sense. We cannot reach any conclusion if we use that argument there, right? So this is what we mean by distraction. This is what we mean by red herring fallacy. The fallacy of analogy. Fallacy of analogy basically also is all. Fallacy of analogy is also called false analogy or weak analogy. Essentially, what happens here is when the argument is based on misleading or inappropriate comparison, in that case, we come across the fallacy of analogy. Let's have an example, right? So if I say A is a human, B is also a human, right? And A has property, right? A has property. So based on this information, I come to the conclusion that B also has property. Why? Because A is a human, B is also a human. and so A has property, so B must also have property. So just because there is this similarity that exists, can I compare them in each and every aspect just because there is one single variable which exists commonly between both of them? Does that mean I can compare them in each and every aspect? That does not mean, right? That does not make any sense, right? This is what we mean by inappropriate comparison, and using that inappropriate comparison to reach a conclusion which is not going to be true, which is not going to be the correct conclusion, cognate conclusion, right? This is what we mean by fallacy of analogy. Moving on to non sequitur fallacy. Non sequitur literally means it does not follow. It is the Latin for the term it does not follow, right? It does not follow, right? You can remember it that way. So it literally means that the conclusion and the premise, they do not have logical connection. There is a lack of logical connection, there is irrelevance. The conclusion is not related or just very slightly or tangentially related to the premise. It is an invalid inference, it is an invalid observation that we made. Let's have an example. If I say it's raining outside, and then based on this I reach a conclusion, I need to buy an umbrella right away. See, while raining and buying umbrella, they are somewhat connected to each other. However, raining does not automatically result in having to buy the umbrella right away. If you want to go outside in the rain, then it might result in that. However, here the information is incomplete to reach this conclusion. If it is raining outside, does that mean that you have to buy the umbrella right away? We need further information to reach this conclusion. It is raining outside, I need to go out for a while, so I need an umbrella. But I do not have an umbrella, so I need to buy one right away. Right? That might be the case. However, if I directly reach this conclusion, then there will be a lot of my own opinions that I'm adding to this. I am adding the opinions like I need to go out and I do not have an umbrella already available to me. Hence, I need to buy it. And I need to go right away. I need to immediately go out. So, I need to buy it right away. Right? So these are the opinions that of myself that I'm adding to it. I am trying to justify the conclusion in this case. Right? However, according to the premise, according to the logical reasoning, if the conclusion itself needs justifications and I need to use my own opinions, my own information to add to it as justification, then that conclusion is not the correct conclusion, right? Hence we can say it does not directly follow from the premise which is given to me, causing non sequitur fallacy. Moving on to ad populum. The fallacy, or sometimes also called argument ad populum, it also is known as appeal to popularity or bandwagon fallacy. Bandwagon fallacy. You can remember it like a lot of people used to say, right, that she jumped onto the bandwagon of that trend. Right? What do we mean by that? That there was a trend going on, a lot of people wanted to do that, a lot of people were following that trend, so she also jumped on to that trend. She followed people, right? The similar thing also happens here. It literally means that when someone claims that this particular thing happened, that this conclusion is correct. Why? Because a lot of people believe in it. This is what we mean by ad populum, right? In other words, when an argument relies on popularity more than it relies on logic, then the fallacy of ad populum happens. Let's have an example. If I say 9 out of 10 dentists recommend this toothpaste, so it must be the best one out there. Does that make any sense? Are we sure that these 9 out of 10 do not receive the money from the company to recommend it? Are they not sponsored? The toothpaste being the best one will depend upon its effectiveness and not just recommendations from dentists, right? And it is also going to depend upon the individual need, right? We cannot be very sure about it. Like, just because some people say that it is true, some people say that it is the best one, it is the best one as well. That does not make sense, right? This is what we mean by argument ad populum. Let's have a recap of all that we discussed today. First, we discussed what exactly is critical reasoning. Critical reasoning refers to using the premise which is given to you, using the argument which is given to you, applying logic on it in order to reach the conclusion, right? Furthermore, we talked about the importance of it, as in what kind of questions and how many questions on an average can we expect from this topic in the various examinations, various major MBA entrance examinations. Moving on, we also discussed various types of formal logic: the inductive, the deductive, the abductive logic. After that, we also discussed the concepts, the base concepts for critical reasoning: the premise, the assumption, the inference, and the conclusion. And then, towards the end of it, we also discussed major fallacies, some common fallacies or flaws that can occur when applying logic, which might lead to various different and wrong conclusions, hence resulting in wrong answers for the questions that we must avoid, right? This was all that we discussed today. Hope this was good. All the best. See you next time.